But the Polish history, to know something of the background of something of their long history is helpful to understand what you're going to see in some of the churches, just some of the architecture, like in the Central Square and such. We'll get to that in a moment. First, thanks for coming tonight. It's good to be here with you. I was a little concerned about having enough to say. I was not concerned about having enough slides to show or pictures to show. So I really whittled those down. A few people asked about recording it. So I got my little device that I use throughout my pilgrimage recording. So just FYI, know that it's being recorded, but that's also my remote control for my slideshow. My phone is, so I'm going to have to stay put just a little bit more than what I would ordinarily do. You know, as we go through, you're welcome to ask questions if something comes up or want a little bit of clarification. On the slides, several of the slides are going to have multiple images, and then some of the slides not only have images but also videos. Okay, so you'll begin to see one of what looks like a picture begin to move. Now I can't go back and replay those, and so I just tell you that in advance. You'll see multiple videos playing as I go through this slideshow. All right. Okay, so let's begin and trust ourselves to Our Lady. Hail Mary, full of grace,
the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
John Paul II,
Pray for us.
and the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, thanks so much for being here. But just the origin of this, I just kept feeling prompted, even though it didn't feel like the right time to take a parish pilgrimage, just continued to feel prompted to go, pray, and listen. And I'm just glad I did. Part of what I was preparing for, I think, is a future parish pilgrimage or pilgrimages. Without knowing any Polish or never having been to Poland, I was a little nervous about leading a pilgrimage. I can't decipher anything from the language, from my little bit of Italian. I could travel in France, so I had like 10 days in between the end of the semester of my Latin studies, and so I just flew to Lyon, brought a big map, and rented a car and drove around the whole country by myself, and it really was no problem. I couldn't imagine trying to get around Poland like that. They do drive on the correct side of the street in some countries, but I'm very grateful for the guide that I had, who you'll see in here. There are a couple of clips with him. I was put in touch with him through a priest classmate of mine who is from Poland. He and his family came over when he was 12 years old. He's an ordained priest for Chicago. So I reached out to him. His close contact just had twins, so she was on maternity leave, but they put me in touch with this man, and his help really was invaluable. So, to start out, what you see before you is what I saw on that first day of pilgrimage. So I got a later start on things than what I anticipated, or there was just more to get ready, I think, than I had planned. So priests pray the liturgy of the hours. So we pray, 5 times a day? And I just took a screenshot of what I was praying in the airport. That's 2:30 on October 24th, Monday. That is actually morning prayer. It was morning somewhere. Sitting, but it's okay. It sometimes happens. And there's the first part of morning prayer. As I departed, I come to the end of my pilgrimage and into the presence of God. The sense of a pilgrimage has to do with relation to our overall pilgrimage here on earth. It's to help us think of that larger journey that we're on. And so you leave what's familiar in faith, and you set out. Now, certainly it's a lot easier for us than what it would have been hundreds of years ago when you depended on the hospitality of so many people to keep you alive. But that's the sense, and that was helpfully contextualized it for me. Okay, this is part of a larger picture. And that's just the screenshot on the back of the monitor on the flight from Detroit to Amsterdam. The flight from Detroit to Amsterdam was delayed, which made me miss the flight from Amsterdam to Krakow. They only had 2 scheduled in the day, and so I arrived in Krakow much later and wasn't able to do some things that I had anticipated. You know, I thought maybe it'd be helpful, I don't know about for you, but for me, geography outside the U.S. is not my strong suit. So I thought it might just be helpful to see, okay, where are we at in the world? And I know some people, including my mother, wondered, okay, how close are you to Ukraine? You know, Poland shares a border, right, with Ukraine, but we were not that close there. So, you know, if you talk about the overall history, the date that my guide said is probably a good date to begin with is 966, which you may have seen that on the initial video. That's the baptism of Poland. That's what they call it. That's when Christianity came to Poland. You also saw throughout that video a lot of conflict and then growth, and then conflict and growth, and you saw these different images of ripping and tearing on the map. That's Poland being divided at different times. They speak of the partitions, which I don't know when that was, 1500s, 1300s, which left a deep mark on their psyche, but that was maybe one of the most significant. Of course, you recognized the Soviets and the Germans. And again, they're split in 2. And what you'll see in the architecture and in faith of the people is that their identity was maintained through their faith. Their religiosity is what allowed them not to lose themselves and become assimilated to whatever force was at work there. So that was the overall picture of Poland. Here is more of a close-up, and those blue dots are the areas that I visited or had planned to visit. So this one here in the Tatra Mountains, those are basically the Polish Alps. I had to just omit because of that flight delay, which it turned out fine. It was going to be an 8-hour trip out there, so that worked fine. But you see, I really didn't travel that far outside of Krakow. The farthest I went was Jasna Góra in Częstochowa. Just to give you a sense. So day 1, that was from the jet, of course, just arrival, hotel check-in, and then the mass that I had planned to attend, I couldn't, and we were fortunate to come across another church that allowed me to celebrate Mass. I chose a hotel to be centrally located, that is basically in the old town. So there's one wall remaining of the old city walls. You know, unlike Rome, where there's lots and lots of ancient walls remaining, they tore down all but one section of that. So I stayed basically within the old town in Krakow, except for those day trips. So Holy Trinity in Krakow, that's the oldest brick structure in Krakow. It dates from 1223, long time. So it's run by the Dominicans. Some of these churches have a blend of architecture, just numerous fires over the years, and stories to go along with that. So Some are more consistent than others in terms of the architecture, but this would be kind of a blend of Gothic. And Gothic, what it seeks to do is, you see these lines basically running up here. It wants to elevate your eyes. It wants to lift them up, okay, to the heavens, or what you see depicted on the ceiling there, which was a common practice with the stars in the sky. Dominicans are very hospitable. I mean, we had no previous contact. Most places I'd reached out to in advance to say, hey, can I celebrate Mass here or there? And everybody was very accommodating. I mean, it's a small world. A couple of them knew English. And I said, hey, I had a professor who is from Poland. He's a Dominican. And I said, his name is Geert. Oh, yeah, he still comes here from time to time. So after the evening Mass, we went to a traditional Polish restaurant. I enjoyed the food. This is, I've shared this with you. I think I mentioned at Mass before that when I was living in Rome, I developed a gluten allergy. And it's been 20 years. And the physician, my doctor, or doctors over the years have said at times you could test it, and I have, and I always needed to return to the diet, but there was just not much on the menu, and that was like a cabbage roll with some rice and some meat, and then they do a lot of beets and roots and such. And I thought, well, that's probably not too bad. Oh, my favorite part was the mulled wine. It was extraordinary. All these seasonings, in a hot wine with other liquor. But I had a little bit there. I suspect gluten did okay. The next day we were walking, my guide and I, by a Polish donut shop. And he said, these are great Polish donuts. So I'll try it. So I tried it and I thought, oh, I felt okay. And then, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but when we traveled to Wadowice, which is where the Pope was born, his hometown, I had king's cake. He bought it for me, so I was in there praying, and then came out, and you gotta have Pope's cake, okay, Pope's cake. It's kind of a custard with pastry on top. The story goes that he was talking with, I don't know if it was like college-age kids or something like that, and he told a story about being in high school, and after they got done with the finals, they would go out and have, I think it was called King's Cake, and then it was rebranded Pope's Cake. And they all started to laugh because they had liquor. And they said, oh, here's the Pope talking about leaving high school and having cake that has liquor in it. But I did okay with that. And then he said, well, we've got two choices for restaurants, a traditional Polish restaurant or Italian. And I thought, well, Italian, I can get some meat and rice or something. We go in, and it was pizza or pasta. So I thought, well, hey, what do you do? So I had a pizza. I felt all right. So to this point, I've still been surviving okay. I can't believe how cheap bread is here. Real bread, since I was in college. Anyway, I enjoyed the food. Now, what I tried to do is point out every day just a little bit of the path from my hotel, and this one doesn't capture where the hotel is, so that's just walking. And a lot of them all have a distance indicated on there. So walking distance, that was 15 minutes or so to walk through the old square down to Wawel Cathedral. That's like St. Peter's is for Archbishop Naumann, that's what Wawel Cathedral is for the bishop there at Krakow. Vastly different structure, and you'll see that in just a moment. Under the main level is this area of crypts, and already you see this unique history because here I'm celebrating Mass. That's the altar John Paul II had his first Mass at. Okay, you'll see that in just a moment. So he had his first Mass there, I think it was November 2nd, at St. Leonard's Crypt, but you'll see around the altar tombs of kings. So there's this interplay between kingdom, state, and church throughout. So that was my basic itinerary. One other comment before I get into these pictures is some of what you're going to see are from different days. So you're going to see some different lighting that's not going to make maybe a whole lot of sense, because there are other days when I thought, I want to go back to some of these places. Okay. The image on the left is from Google Earth. That's of the cathedral itself. It says Royal Castle, but Royal Castle is kind of just behind where that image is. There's not a great place to take a photo of the front of that cathedral. You can see a little courtyard, I think that's off to the south or so. Out the entrance of the church, the other direction is a museum of John Paul II, but that's an actual photo of part of the cathedral, that left tower, part of the tower. Okay, that you could go up, and I attempted to go up, but there was a group of kids, so it was extraordinary to see the number of school kids out in these places, whether it be the castle or the cathedral or other places. They're like field trips. They were going to learn, make sure you learn your Jewish history. So here's just a little background. The Babel Cathedral, that's the site of coronations and burials of kings since 1320. Since 1000 AD, it's the seat of the bishop. The first stable settlements on Babel Hill appeared 5,000 years ago. So traces of a Christian church exist there, dating from the 9th century. Saint Stanislaus figures prominently. He was the reluctant bishop of Krakow in 1072, known for his preaching against sinful living, regardless of the sinner's class. He was killed by King Boleslaw the Cruel, also known as the Bold, after Saint Stanislaus had communicated him due to his war crimes and attempted theft of land from the church. So Stanislaus was murdered while celebrating Mass. So reaction against the king was so great that he fled the country, never to return. His guilt led him to become a monk. Stanislaus became a symbol of Polish patriotism and nationalism, and sometimes considered a martyr. So he's like the prototypical, the ideal Archbishop of Krakow. He's the defender of the city. Okay, not just the Catholic faith, but the city itself. Okay, and this comes out with John Paul II as he took a stand against Nazism and communism. So interior of Babel Cathedral. So, as I said, these structures have burnt multiple times. There's been multiple renovations. Here you're seeing a Baroque form. Baroque, unlike Gothic. Gothic wants to draw your eyes to the sky. Baroque wants to bring the sky down to you. Okay, wants to make heaven very tangible. If you go to St. Peter's, Baroque is everywhere. I mean, there are angels, there are figures everywhere. Okay, so this image here is actually my looking back from the high altar, the far high altar, to that altar. I think they called it a mausoleum. This silver casket there is where the remains of St. Stanislaus are contained, as well as, I think, St. Albert. This is the presbytery. So I don't know exactly how that would have functioned in ancient days. I mean, you could see priests celebrating at a large mass. But what I noticed at this place is it just didn't seem like there was a whole lot of opportunity to have huge gatherings on like St. Peter's. So here's one of the videos, and don't get car sick as it goes. So that's the high altar. And I did this multiple times just to give you a sense of what you're looking, you know, the scope of that. Tapestries hung all over chandeliers. Sorry, there's no way with that camera. Right. Here's the crypts where John Paul II had his first Mass, where I celebrated Mass. This is in a Romanesque style. Okay, so this is from a different time. You can kind of see it. Some of the simplicity. Noble simplicity in there. Okay, so that's an example of a video within an image. So those are either bishops or kings who are housed there. You know, I went to pray my morning prayer, and there was this guy from New York, and he goes there on a yearly basis, and so he knows the guy who's on my right, who's an employee at the cathedral and the help tour. So I was in before it was opened up for the general public to offer Mass, and he just introduced me to this guy. Just to show you some of the detail. Okay, so this was their adoration chapel. Stained glass windows, you know, not a huge space, but there's an image of the ceiling. All right. So what I offered you here on the left side is an overhead of the medieval square. And one thing I wanted to show, a couple things that I wanted to show you with this, is you can see the age of the buildings, the antiquity of these two buildings because of their layout. Everything else is square, these are angled. So these pre-existed this, right? Again, a huge fire. I don't know if I have this video in there or not, to kind of show you how far it went. But also draw your attention to this white area around these two churches. That was their cemetery. Okay, so you think of a church having a cemetery where they did, close by, yeah, that's pretty close by. So the white stone is to mark where they exhumed hundreds of graves and replaced them and moved them, transported them. But it's just as a sign of reverence. Here was holy ground, here's where people were buried. This is what used to be a major market, is more of a tourist thing now. So I'm just showing you a little bit of the Church of St. Adalbert. St. Adalbert, again, it's fascinating, the faith. My guide said, okay, so St. Adalbert came through, he was from Hungary. He preached here for a while, but went on to Prussia, Germany, and was killed there by pagans. He said, but we needed a saint's bones here, so we asked that we could have St. Adalbert here since he stopped here. And he said, we claim him as our own. So St. Adalbert's, he's the foremost patron saint of Poland, first Polish saint. John Paul II celebrated Mass in this tiny church 1,000 years after his martyrdom. It's the oldest building in the area. So it was built between the 11th and 12th century. The walls predate the city of Krakow. The church also played a defensive role in the protection of the castle until 1257. So it Baroque architecture kind of took over in the 17th century rebuild. Now, yeah, that's a grave. I don't know that I can recall like 14th, 15th century grave remains. Now, if you'll watch on the left side, I believe this will be a video, and it's going to show you the different layers of the city. Okay, so they built, and then something happened, and they built on top of it, and then they built on top of it, and built on top of it. Okay, the original entrance to this ancient church is from the side. You can see these people leaning over. You know, there's some sort of barrier there, and you have to go down, I would say 10 feet, close, 8 to 10 feet, to get to the original entrance to that church. Now the entrance is there. Downstairs is a museum, but it just shows you over the centuries what has happened. And this church, in this very busy place, adoration going on. So you can just kind of catch the different layers there. You see that? And those are all marked out. Some detail with the different ages. That's the town clock tower, the textile marked, full of tourist things now. The city was just alive. I was blessed with great weather. Really every day, I think it sprinkled for 30 minutes one day. Otherwise, it was about 70 degrees and pretty much clear skies. So that's why we're walking over to St. Mary's Church. It's the Assumption of Mary. It's a formal name. And you see this here. That's the, imagine the bishop coming out to make a proclamation. Okay, this is the interior. Now, it's stunning to see how the light changes the interior of this church. So it was built on the site of a Romanesque church founded at the beginning of the 13th century. It's built entirely of handmade bricks, a basilica style, which means that it's got columns, a central nave, it's got columns and an exterior aisles. It took the the main body of the church was erected between 1350 and 1397. Okay, and it took the entire 15th century to complete the structure. Okay, so I hope you're in it for the long haul. So this main high altar piece, I have additional images by Veit Strauss. It's hand carved wood. Okay. And it's a triptych. As you can hear, 3 parts, 1, 2, 3. Okay, a depiction of the Dormition and the Assumption of Mary, and then scenes from her life or Christ's life on either side. Now, the triptych, the sides will move in and cover it up. And I didn't realize the first time I went in here, which was at night, and so the lighting was very different. It was actually closed. I didn't realize that until I started going through these pictures. So this is just a national treasure, as you can imagine. And the stained glass windows. I mean, so they're meant to be like the jewels of heaven from the book of Revelation, which are meant to be the saints of heaven, the many colored, different types of saints. And there's more of a close-up as well. I found this fascinating too, because it was post-Vatican II when larger crucifixes became the standard. You might remember that the high altars in the old churches, like the church we got ours from, this was side altar, but it had a high reredos with saints in there, and typically it was a smaller cross. Typically it's post-Vatican II when you see a huge cross, but if you look at the top of that left image, you see this enormous, you'll see it next time. Isn't it amazing? So full of color there.
Yeah.
Oh.
You see that? Yeah. the textures vary significantly. I'm not actually sure what material this is. In some places, you'll see mosaics. There are hardly any mosaics here, which are little pieces of glass, colored pieces of glass that are fit together. Not many frescoes, only in the really old ones that have not had damage. So I know in the castle this was done, but it's like a leather that's put on the wall and painted. That's almost what that looked like. So I did a close-up. I talked about that in one of my videos. I mean, the columns are meant to symbolize something beyond themselves. They're not just there for a structural purpose, but they're to indicate, hey, this has been built up. This church, your faith, our faith, has been built up from specific people. And so in some places, they'll fit a statue of a saint in a column to make that connection for us. Now, you'll see a big distinction as we move along to some of the modern architecture when it's just about functionality. Right? It's just, I gotta hold up the ceiling. Right? Here, there's something more that's going on. So you have multiple side altars. I don't know if I captured that so much in this church or not. You can see one on one side of the column. And I think also something of that is indicated here. So this is the exterior. And those do not look like identical pieces at the top. So my guess is maybe different renditions of the church or different significant churches. So it's indicate once again, okay, the churches are built on whom? Ultimately Christ, but how do we have access to it? Well, through people. Right, so exterior image. One of the unique features is the different heights of the towers. There are different stories for that, possible explanations. My guide said it's just practical because this functioned as a lookout tower. Okay, so there you see again this blend. And the image on the left with the monument is to a poet, 19th century romantic poet. His remains are in the cathedral as well. So now, okay, you have not only royalty, but you have these other significant figures who've developed, built up the culture, the Polish culture, which they recognize in a monument, but also by placing it within the cathedral. Just panoramic, the square. This is that nice. This is when I first went in. And maybe you can see that triptych has been closed. At first I thought, was I in a different church? But because look at the colors. Look how different the colors of the walls are. But yeah, it's the same. It's just got images out there. Now, this is a different church. This is where I had Mass. Let's see, I think it's the Franciscan church. I think I had that when I got back from Auschwitz.
Were the masses that you said, were they open masses for other people to join in, or was it a private?
Well, both rather. I mean, principally it was a private Mass, but if somebody came in, which happened from time to time, then they participated. That happened at the Chapel of Divine Mercy. So people came in, so it happened multiple times. Oh, gosh, I'm so glad you asked that. Because when I left Rome, I had an early morning flight, so I think I left the hotel at like 5 or 5:30 or something like that. And a priest wants to celebrate Mass, needs to celebrate Mass every day. I mean, it's participation in this act by which we've been made whole. And I thought, when is this going to happen? Well, probably when I get all the way back here. It's still the same day. Like hours, I don't know what, 18 hours later, something like that. But I stopped in JFK. That was where my layover was. And I saw an advertisement for a chapel, a Catholic chapel. So I called, somebody picked up, and I said, hey, could I celebrate a Mass there? And sure enough, so I was in the airport in this little side chapel, and a guy who did not speak English came in and participated in Mass right there. So it happened multiple times. Yeah, Franciscan. On the left, you can see an image of St. Francis. And then on the right, this is just across the street, is what they call the Bishop's Palace, Bishop's Residence, and the offices. They're all right together, and in the offices is this chapel that a sister was kind enough to open up for us, and this is where John Paul II was ordained, covertly. Oh, well, good afternoon. This is Father Farrar, along with my new friend, Polish friend. Introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Hello, my name is Severin. I'm a history teacher and guide in Krakow. Originally I'm from this part of Poland. I was born about 40 miles from Krakow, nearby Wadowice, a small town where the Pope was born, John Paul II. And currently I'm working on my PhD at John Paul II University here.
Pretty good guy.
So my field of research is the Jewish Messianic movement. So I write about Jewish people who believe in Jesus.
Fascinating. Yes, I've got a great guy perfect for this. So far today we have been on tours at the castle and cathedral. Now we're about to go to a Franciscan seminary.
Actually, we will see both from Franciscan Seminary and Franciscan Monastery, because actually we are standing next to the second oldest Franciscan monastery in Poland. Franciscans came to Krakow in 1237. So what do we have here? This is like a mother of almost all Franciscan monasteries in Poland. And today we have about 30 brothers living in the monastery, and also 30 students in the Franciscan seminary. And one of the students soon will come to us and show us the monastery.
You were just telling me about the importance of this spot right here. That's where the chapel I showed you was. So over here, as Severin tells us about this place.
So this is the most famous window in Krakow, Papal's window, and you can see there the picture of John Paul II. And so why do you have his picture there? Because every time when John Paul II visited Krakow, he stayed in the building. This is the Bishop Palace. And from this window, he was talking to thousands of young people gathered here. Because it was a local tradition that young people were coming to meet with the Pope during evening time. And from this window, he was blessing them, talking to them, and making some jokes. So now we have this picture. It's like a symbol that he stayed with us.
So this is from two different events. I can't fast forward. I suspect it's somewhere else in Krakow. But what you'll see momentarily is that space, and I think it was maybe 89 or so, 90s, where the Pope was. And I show it to you just to get a sense of the relationship between the Pope and all these young people. So that's where I was taking a shot. 1933. That's when I took a relatively short trip to Varlice, about an hour away or so. I would say this was one of my favorite days. I would say especially because of the museum and the church too. Obviously, the museum has so much to it, a lot of which I did not capture. And honestly, I didn't take pictures of the pictures in there. So the Pope's Boyhood Church, I was telling you about side altars. There's an altar, and there's an altar on the back side of the column. So I think it's on every column there, you've got additional altars, which it just makes me think, wow, they had a lot of priests to justify all those altars in there. See the pulpit over there on that column? You know, more centrally located, so your voice would carry. You can see people kneeling down line for confessions. So these two places were especially prominent in that church. The place of his baptism, this is where he was baptized. First communion, confirmation all took place in this church. And then this special chapel at the rear of the church, dedicated to him. So the chair that he sat in and such is all kept there. Okay, so this is from the museum. The museum is across the street, just barely. I mean, I don't even know if there's a street there, just across from the church. These are the actual flats where he and his family lived. So the museum has taken over that whole building and made those flats, those apartments, part of it. So there were 3 that they rented. Now, things have changed, you know, since they were there, but this is redone according to his memory. You saw Kneeler there, Purdue. He talks how important it was to see his dad kneeling down praying, you know, every day. 1919. His parents moved into the building with their older son, Edmund. May 18th, 1920, Carol Fotiwa was born in that bedroom that you saw. And then 1929, his mother died. 3 years later, his brother died, which is said to maybe have affected him even more than his mom. So he and his dad lived here until he finished high school and moved to Krakow in 1938. So you're going to see on the left pane a little video of their kitchen. Out the kitchen window, and you can just barely see it in this one, is a sundial that evidently was influential, not so much of the sundial, but because of the inscription across the top that says, "Time flies, eternity is waiting," right? So it's as though he was eating all his meals there, looking at this and saying, "Okay, make your time count." Some of the literature said that, you know, given the furniture that they had and that his dad was in the army, they were likely right in the middle class, Polish middle class, which didn't make him wealthy, but didn't make him terribly poor. So this is one of the few items that I took a picture of. This is his consent to being named Pope. Okay, so the actual document indicating that, and the name that he would take, right here. So Karol Wojtyła, the cardinal, accepts the election according to canon law to be the pontiff. And so he signs. Throughout the museum, there are many pictures. This captures all his travels. So everywhere he went, he brought a little dirt home. It was placed in there, so it's this long runway of all these different places. you know, to me, it felt like I was journeying along with him as he grew up. You know, he walked through the different stages of his life, his time in school, his time as an actor, and then as a student at the seminary, and then as a chaplain, and all these photos of him ministering to college students, especially caught my attention.
Didn't he come to the United States? When was that?
Oh, let's see,
A couple of times.
March window, Denver. Well, he came when he's been here multiple times. As Pope, it was just once,
Yes.
right? But as Bishop, I think he was here more than once.
And at the Pope, wasn't it a big youth festival? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, World Youth Day.
Yeah.
World Youth Day.
He was also here in 79.
What's that?
He was here in 1979.
79. Twice as Pope?
Twice.
Twice as Pope. Okay. So, you know, as you walk through, as you get further along in his life, there were excerpts from his writings. So I took a number of these. I thought two might be relevant. This is from '95, trip back to Poland. And so they had overcome significant obstacles like the communist oppression. But here's a man warning them about what is likely going to come as they begin to face prosperity, right, and some of the dangers inherent in that. We need to remember those times of a great test of consciences, because they're still a valid warning for us and a call for vigilance, so that consciences of Poles do not become deprived, so that they do not give in to the trend of moral permissiveness, so that they are able to discover the liberating character of the evangelical teaching in God's commandments, so that they are able to choose, bearing Christ's warning in mind. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? Even though it might not seem so, the law of conscience has to be defended also today. Great, or perhaps even increasing intolerance is spreading in the public life and in the mass media under cover of promotion of tolerance. This is particularly painful felt by believers. There's a tendency to push them onto the margin of social life, to ridicule, scoff what they often hold most sacred. These forms of recurring discrimination are worrying, and they should give us a lot to think about. Brothers and sisters, the time of the test of Polish conscience is now. You need to be strong in your faith. When you're struggling with regard to the future shape of the social public life, you should remember that it depends predominantly on what man will be like and what his conscience will be like. Okay, here's a father warning his children, preparing them for what's coming next. Don't lose sight of what a human being is. That's what allowed us to withstand the onslaught of all these false ideologies. And then, this is important for us. It's important, I think, for understanding the architecture and the Pope's life in general. You know, where does this internal strength of the Polish immigrant community come from? We should look for its sources on the Vistula River here, in Poles' faith and culture. Culture is an expression of man creating it. Man creates himself through it. And at the same time, man creates culture and community with others. Polish culture is a value on which the spiritual life of Poles is based. It sets us apart as a nation. It's something that determines us throughout the ages. It's more constitutive than material force and even political borders. As we know, the Polish nation has stood the difficult test of losing its independence for over a century and managed to remain itself. The reason why the Poles retained the spiritual independence with it was that they had their own culture. What is more, my dearest, we know that during the most tragic of times, during the partitions, the Polish nation greatly enriched and developed its culture, as a nation can retain its culture only by creating it. So it's drawing from, oh, that's good. He doesn't mean just here what you learn in religion class. The poets, the writers, the artists, gathering all of that is what shapes, he says, the character of a nation, the character of a person, what it allows, and that it allows you to endure. So at the end of the museum was this large section of prayer requests that had been sent from all over the world. And my understanding is at the time of his beatification, canonization. All right, so pray for us. The same day I went to Calvaria, which is a Benedictine monastery not far away. It has a tie to Jerusalem, to the Station to the Cross. It's especially relevant for us because this is where John Paul II's dad took him when his mom passed away and brought him to this altar, to this icon of Our Lady, and said, "She'll be your mother now." Day 4. Czestochowa, Jasna Gora is the monastery by the Pauline Fathers. It was the longest travel day. 2.5 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours there. Our Lady of Czestochowa, which is widely venerated and credited with many miracles. Among these, it's credited with miraculously saving the Jasna Gora monastery during the siege of Jasna Gora that took place at the time of the deluge, a 17th century Swedish invasion. The event stimulated the Polish resistance. The Poles could not immediately change the course of the war, but after an alliance with the Crimean Khanate, they repulsed the Swedes shortly after in the Cathedral of Lviv, so that's Ukraine, on April 1st, 1656. The King of Poland solemnly pronounced his vow to consecrate the country to the protection of the Mother of God and proclaimed her the patron and queen of the lands in his kingdom. So 400 years of real devotion to Our Lady. All right, there's an aerial image. And you can't quite see it here, but again, there is this blend between religion and state because there are lookouts and there are cannons, you know, situated there. Again, just from a different vantage point. I mean, there's a retreat place, so if you wanted to, or if we wanted to, we could stay at this place, right, or stay a couple days. I loved the church, the colors, all the light. So here is not stained glass windows. You hear a lot of sunlight. But I love the colors of those columns. Okay, that's the high altar. That would be the either Assumption or the crowning of Mary, and that's just detail from that ceiling that you can barely reach. So here's another video. Multiple organs, one on either side, I think, and then one clear in the back. Okay, then this is off to the side. Is the chapel for the icon of the Black Madonna. Okay, behind those bars, gates, is that chapel. And then you can see here there's a pathway that runs all the way behind the icon. So Mass is celebrated there, right? But even during Mass you see people going back around doing their prayers on their knees. I think I shared in my video that that icon is veiled for certain times during the day, which I think just cultivates interest in it. Okay, now you only have a limited time. Get there. And just, that's the veiling of it, so you can see it closely. Great pomp. If you notice all these young people coming through. Can you see it?
So it's like a curtain that comes down?
Yeah, that comes down the front. So that's where I took your positions, right in the midst. I made my way around. And then there were large deposit them in, and then the monks there would pray.
Is that
They-
the closest you can get to Lycon?
Well, you can get into the chapel, but if you're asking, can I touch it? No. No. All right. Day 5, Divine Mercy, which comes from St. Faustina's visions and her diary that the Pope promoted, and the chaplet of Divine Mercy. And John Paul II understood after 2 world wars, humanity needed to understand that they could be forgiven for the terrible crimes that had been perpetrated on one another. So not far from where I stayed, the Divine Mercy Shrine was created rather recently. Okay. Next to the convent where St. Faustina was. And you begin to see what I mentioned regarding architecture in there. Everywhere that has some connection with the Pope has got to have, a big statue of him. So Divine Mercy Shrine over here, the John Paul II sanctuary is across the way. You see what I mean for the columns? It's just, we're doing a job. Yeah, we're doing a job here, which, it communicates a worldview that was encroaching more and more. There's a significant shift between the previous churches and this one, right? Is there any connection between this world and the other world? Can this world reveal something of the transcendent? The architecture says, no, this world is not deeply connected. The physical can't reveal transcendent. Okay, and there's the chapel. That's the original image of the Divine Mercy that was painted after St. Faustina's visions. That's the container of her relics. And I just saw this, and I walked in on a group. I don't remember which country they were from, celebrating Mass, but young families coming, praying, and I'll let this go for a little bit, but it started so that little girl just knelt down, did the sign of the cross along the way, but there she is praying. Okay, so I had to take a picture of this. I don't know if you'll be able to see it all the way back there. So this is St. Faustina's room, okay? And in the room are these items. And that's what's listed there. A lamp, a copy of the manuscript of the diary, her cloak, soup from the refectory, or stoop, stoop from the, so. And then the penitential tools, the thorn belt, the thorn cross, the thorn bracelet, the counting beads so you could keep track, and the penitential hair shirt, the scourges for self-flagellation, and the rosary. So here was somebody who was doing penance. What do you say in the chaplet? Have mercy on us for our sins and those of the whole world. It's like she's identifying with Christ who bore the pain, if you will. So it's not foreign to her. It's not something far removed. You just barely see it. I just couldn't get that close. Okay, so in certain penitential days, she's putting on, like John the Baptist, wearing camel's hair under her habit. Thank you. These doors will come back and make a little bit more sense when I get to Rome. But there were 3 sets of these, and across the top is a quotation from John's Gospel. He who remains in me will bear much fruit. And depicted, I think these are bronze doors, on all of these are the Pope's different writings and different places. So his document or his encyclical on the family, on mercy. Those are mosaics. This is a much more modern structure. I found it more appealing than the Divine Mercy Shrine. There's an upper level and a lower level to it. But there's also a museum. And I was able to take a few pictures here. So they have the garment that he was wearing when the assassination attempt took place on the left. So there's a Pope's blood, etc. And then his room. So that's a reconstruction of his room. I don't know about you, whenever I hear apostolic palace, I don't picture a bedroom. Significant TV. And then they had tons of these gifts that had been given to the Pope over the years, all different places. And I thought, oh, cool, that's best wishes from President and Mrs. Reagan. That's one of the first things you see. Day 6, solemn day, about an hour away or so. I went with a group on this one. It was a small group in the van that transported us. And then the tour guide there was just draw the hat. So there are lots of tour guides, and I think they just connect with whichever one is booked. Now, we would be able to, if we went as a group, do it a little bit differently. That was me just jumping in with somebody. That's the kind of the famous entrance, mocking all those who would come in. Work will make you free. Sure it will. There was a solemn tone, a really respectful tone by everyone who was there. This is Auschwitz, and that's the one that I always thought of. I never thought of Birkenau. Auschwitz is the smaller of the two. You'll see that once we get to Birkenau. There's so much that remains here, unlike the other. So that first picture was a picture of a postcard that I bought so I could get that image. You just imagine the thousands and thousands went through that door. That door to God. Streets, all these, a lot of them are houses, rooms, dormitories, essentially. So I took a couple pictures of the pictures they had up. This is basically separating the men from the women and children. And then the next picture, which I didn't include, was this or this. You have, are you under 14? Not good. Do you have any handicaps? Well, we have something special for you. Go this way, and that's what it was. They had these great big display cases, rooms really. These are eyeglasses. And as I mentioned, handicap. Well, crutches, prosthetics. There are only a handful of places where they did not allow us to take pictures. Shoes. pictures of the inmates. And you'll hear my guide, so we all had headphones, and he was speaking into a microphone that was being broadcast, but I'm close enough to him that you can hear him describe what to look at. Maybe. Okay, so he was saying, if you look at the date that they were deported and the date that they died, he said you can see how unlikely it was that you would survive, because they were so close and how hard it was. Most of them are like a year or so, or less. And the children, they took into rooms where the doctor played on people. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you know a lot of that experimental test on, what would this do to their eye if I injected it in them? Just terrible, terrible experience. Two different rooms. The dorm room, basically, and a washroom. I told you there were a couple of places where they did not allow photos. One were confinement rooms where they put people who were misbehaving. And so it was a very small chamber where maybe 4 people would be placed in darkness and without enough room to be able to sit down. Right, so you went out, you worked, you came back, and you were stuck in there. It was down in that area where Maximilian Kolbe's cell was. So it was in the area where you really couldn't take pictures. So I bought a postcard and took a picture of the postcard. But yeah, you know the story of him giving up his life for a man who was chosen to die and who had a family. Pictured over here is what they call the killing wall. At a certain point, brought him out, shot him. There were these poles that had hooks, which they were. And then here is the entrance to the crematory, to the chimney. So you go underground over on the left side, and then you'll see a video. And one of the things that struck me as I went through it is this is a dark place. But darkness didn't triumph absolutely. Maximilian Kolbe's cell indicates that, and here are images of Christ that were chiseled into the wood. Even in the midst of darkness, there's hope. A short ways away, 2 miles maybe, was Birkenau. Birkenau was built, maybe a year or 2 later. And they preferred it because it was much more efficient with the railway lines going up to it. But one on the left, that gives you some sense of the size. And that's inside the camp itself where those railroad lines are. But before they left, they destroyed most of the evidence. So those are all structures, living structures and whatnot. You just see how vast that is. There was a significant amount of walking. The left is where they, right before they departed, the Nazis destroyed that area. And this was the woman's dormitory. And of course the walkways, the wood would not have been there to the ground floor, but you just look at the living conditions. this memorial that was set up, and our guide couldn't really explain the meaning of what we were looking at. But here you'll see the same thing that's written in every language of a person who has been there.
Every prisoner who died
Right. Forever let this place be a cry of despair, a warning to humanity where the Nazis murdered about 1.5 million men, women, and children, mainly Jews from various countries of Europe. So it was a somber day. Now, I had been given the opportunity to go to the Auschwitz exhibits when I was here in Kansas City. And, in hindsight, I look back and say, in a sense, I'm glad I went through that, because this would be a lot if you're walking through it with nothing before, no preparations before. Okay, day 7. I just put one thing on there. I did other things. I went back to previous places and just spent time in Krakow. I loved the city of Krakow, the old city. Safe, beautiful, and you hear languages from all over the world there, so I enjoyed that very much. I felt like Nova Huda was important for us. It's the new city, the city the communists were going to build that did not have God. There were no God and there were no churches that were going to be there. But people believe. And there's an arrangement between the communist government and Rome that, one, they had to agree on the person named to be bishop. Okay, so they could veto anyone who was put forward by Rome to be the bishop. And this is one of those quirks of providences in history, because they vetoed so many before John Paul II. So multiple bishops, no, we don't want him, we don't want him, we don't want him. And they misunderstood who John Paul II was. So he's a poet. He'll be easy to influence, etc. And they had all this background research done on all these different people. So that, and then John Paul II, he said that canon law requires that you form a parish, as we know, before you build a building. But the government would allow you to form a parish. So that meant you couldn't have a building. Okay. So he started celebrating midnight mass out here at Nova Huda. He would go to parishioners' house, essentially create rules of the parish and say, look, there's a demand for a church. Here's the church that they've built. It's called the Ark Church. You can see the influence, I would say, of the Soviets on the architecture. Let's see if I can show you that a little bit. Here's the inside of it. And they finally prevailed. Just not what you would expect everybody in church. Pews, yes. I thought this was really interesting, though. These are stations of the cross. But worked into them is part of the Polish history. I thought that was ingenious. This was Carthusian monastery nearby, which was kind of a nice welcome space. The interior of this I appreciated because it had less variety. And as I pointed out in the video, all those things that you see next to the cross there, those are from people who either made a request or came back after prayer was answered and donated. And then All Saints Day in Poland. This is what you do. It's unbelievable. And at night, the cemetery is just alive with candles going.
And it's all above ground.
All above ground. Isn't that something? And so there are all these vendors everywhere with flowers. I was wondering, wow, what are they? It's October. So I didn't capture what I wanted to so much. This is just driving along. But as the Soviets came in, they created uniform apartments, flats. Everything was the same. And what they tried to do, I mean, not only beauty doesn't matter. Gray is good, right? That's it. But they would construct them in such a way as to divide residents in that building so that you couldn't form a community naturally with your neighbors. The more that you're separated from other people, the weaker you become, and the more we can influence you. I thought that it was stunning in their living area. And then lastly, there's an aerial of St. Peter's. Just 2-hour flight, I think that's right, from Krakow. I just can't believe I took that picture. It's so beautiful. It's on a hill, kind of to the south of it. The school, I should say the seminary where I stayed is nearby that. Pope's apartments are the last 3 on the top. And obviously there's so much that I can go into in terms of history, but I'm not going to do that. Again, you can see the connection between columns and people, and all these things around. The fountains are meant to call to mind baptism. That obelisk is from Egypt. It was hauled over as kind of a war trophy. It's likely the last image that St. Peter saw as he was crucified upside down on the Vatican Hill. Now, I would love to give you a tour of this and talk to you more about the history. You see the image of Our Lady. So the Pope firmly believed that when he was targeted by the assassin, which is marked out by that spot, he firmly believed that Our Lady intervened. And the doctors also indicated that the trajectory of the bullet can't be explained why it turned the way it did. And so he had an image placed there, which I didn't include the picture from the square in Krakow, but there's another image like that in Krakow to mark the point where the fire stopped. Okay, so there was intervention here. She overlooks us. This is the Jubilee door that he opened in 2000. Okay, what you can see is what the architect at the sanctuary in Krakow drew upon as they created those doors. This on the left is just outside of the sacristy in St. Peter's where Priest Fest. So it's got chiseled in the stone every pope, beginning of St. Peter all the way down to Benedict XVI. So that's just one of the side altars, side altar of Sebastian. St. Peter's. And the voices that you hear, I recorded. I wouldn't ordinarily do this. I was celebrating Mass, so I was up by the altar, and it was communion. That's what it was. And they began to sing, and I thought, oh, I got to get this. Because it was one of the monks who was directing a school of maybe 8 people. and producing this. Isn't that something? It's something we should do. It's just really, I mean, it is. But it's really compelling. And young people seeing doing this. So that's it. Gosh, I kept you for a long time.